For those with a serious or terminal illness or disability, Canadian courts, lawmakers, and culture say there are only two options: a slow, painful death or a quick, easy, assisted suicide. But there is a third option. Join us as we investigate the palliative care alternative and why Canadians should be choosing it.
Up until the summer of 2016, it was always illegal, criminal, for any person to kill another person unless it was for self-defense. And that all changed in June of 2016 when Parliament legalized for the very first time physician-assisted suicide. And that changed everything. This change has profound negative effects on all of society, but particularly on those who are vulnerable, those who need our care most. And they are the ones who feel this change by far the most. Those who are ill, those who are advanced in age, those who have disabilities, they're going to feel this change the most, and that's who we are most concerned about, and those are the ones we need to speak up for.
I am concerned about the elderly, the fragile in our society. I think we need to speak up for them. Mm-hmm. And that dignity, that respect, that compassion goes, in all levels of life, right? The young, the frail, the elderly, the sick.
It's revealing some assumptions in the Canadian population about disability that I think are pretty frightening. The fact that the population at large, and the medical community specifically, sees little value in the life of a disabled person and sees no harm in assisting suicide, does show that they're missing something. That they're not really seeing the beauty of the lives of the disabled in any way. They just see the limitations. They see the disability and nothing else, which is a pretty dangerous thing. It's a shame on us as a country that the only answer we might have for somebody who cries out for help in that way is to say, yes, we can happily end your life. Because I do believe that the solutions to almost every problem that's faced by people with disabilities can be solved.
The legalization of assisted suicide is just another step in what seems to be a program of secularization. But it certainly does something to who we are as society. It puts a chill into society. If we take the example of British Columbia right now, palliative care facilities do not offer physician-assisted death. They're looking at offering that, and some physicians are strongly opposed. Now, they rightly point out that their patients are in an environment of care and trust. They trust that the sole purpose of the palliative care facility, the sole purpose of being in hospice, is to be cared for, to feel worthwhile, to matter, and just to be loved and surrounded with love. As soon as you put in the option of physician-assisted death, you're now faced with the question, does this doctor want me to live, or would this doctor rather have me die? And it erodes the trust relationship that you would have.
I'm Auntie Blocker, and I live in Ceylon Manor for some health reasons. I'm 91 years old. I've had 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. I got 36 grandchildren. I don't know how many boys and girls. And I got 107 great-grandchildren. I'm very richly blessed.
In July of 2016, Mrs. Blocker suffered a stroke and was hospitalized for 3 weeks. What she told us about her experience there was shocking.
There was a lady doctor came around, and she said, you don't have to be scared, but we have to ask everybody if I needed help with dying. And I said right away, no, I don't. I know where I'm going. And my life is in God's hand, and I leave it up to Him. It made me feel really scared. Yeah. Especially when you end up in a hospital.
It makes it very difficult for me to explore the feelings and the fears that people have. In the past, if someone told me, life is it's so hard for me, I wish this was over, then I would have a conversation about that, and I would say, what is it that's making it hard? What can we do better? Why are you struggling? What makes you feel that life isn't worth living? And we would explore all of those areas and then make life as good as it could be for that person. And usually they would come back and say, I had no idea that it could be like this, and I had no idea that it would be so important to bring this closure to my family and be able to help my children face the future. And this is really what palliative care has provided for me. And I actually see the value in my illness now. It's brought me closer to my children, or it's helped me work through a lot of things. And at present, with this new medical aid in dying, it's become a whole area that is almost avoided. And this question comes up, and it's almost like I need to step back, and I'm not allowed to be involved in that care. And it's got to the point that I can't provide that palliative care. I can't cloak someone in the care that they need and are desperately looking for, really, when they voice that. It's just like when someone who is suicidal and says, I just want to end it all. We don't say, okay, let's end it. We say, what is making you suicidal, and how can we help? And that's what we do in the mental health field, but I'm not allowed to do that, or it feels like I'm limited in doing that now in the palliative care field because of this law that's come in.
Somebody joked with me about that. Oh, that'll be good for your profession, right? Everyone's going to die. So the timing, I think, is somewhat irrelevant that way. I think what we're more concerned about is healthy living. That's what we're about for people before their death, but also for people who have survived the death of a loved one. And if our understanding of death and the whole circle around death of what we do, how we can be prepared, how we can be cared for, becomes really muddied and churned up water, I think that doesn't serve anybody well. And if somebody makes a decision that is harmful or difficult for the rest of the family, I think that's going to be difficult. We have to also remember that I think we've got an idea that assisted suicide is just a peaceful going to sleep. I don't think in many cases it will be. And with a family gathered around to witness something like that, may do more harm than good. Somewhere in there, somebody's got to talk to people, and we have to start understanding as a culture, what are we embracing on the one hand, and is that what it's all about? Is death really the escape?
Peter Harseford, a man with severe physical disabilities, has long advocated for disability rights. In May of 2016, he appeared with ARPA Canada before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights to share his concerns about Bill C-14, the proposed assisted suicide law.
As I do have concerns with Bill C-14, including its lack of precision in language. Sadly, I feel that the bill is dangerously dependent on euphemisms. Throughout, medically assisted dying is used to describe what is in reality physician-assisted suicide. This is problematic in the way that it undercuts palliative care.
Sadly, despite Peter's concerns, C-14 was passed into law in June of 2016, largely unamended. Assisted suicide was officially legal. Just days later, a young woman named Julia Lamb, living with the same disease as Peter, launched a lawsuit challenging the law as too narrow. We asked Peter what he thought about this attempt to expand euthanasia.
It's so obvious to see that this was inevitable as soon as the doors were opened to assisted suicide, that all the safeguards in place would immediately be challenged. To be honest, I don't understand where Ms. Lamb is coming from. As I have the same disease that she does, I think we're probably fairly similar in terms of the progression of our disease. She's a few years younger than I am. And from what I've seen of her in interview, I think we're probably pretty similar in terms of ability. And I know from myself, and not just myself, but other people I know with similar or the same disease, that there's no need for a life with muscular atrophy, or with muscular dystrophy, or with cerebral palsy, or any disability really, to be unlivable. And the fact that somebody with a disability only sees herself as somebody whose life is is unlivable is really sad, and it goes to show the impact that others have had on this land and their own self-identity.
I think there's a danger that the response will be just to go ahead and accept that their request for medical assistance in dying is perfectly legitimate and offer it. So the first question is, did she really have a choice? The second question, was it an informed choice? Did she know that there were other options out there? So I think people are saying they want choice, but they want informed choice. So I think the knee-jerk response can be, well, they're asking for it, so we'll get two witnesses and we'll start the process. And but really, we should be asking some questions: why, and do they have effective access to palliative care and timely access to palliative care? And even better yet, if they had timely access to palliative care upstream, they wouldn't have made the request in the first place.
I think the legalized assisted suicide is definitely taking away from palliative care, because funding is already, I think we've seen it shifting from palliative care. We're hearing that you're just not getting quite the funding for it. Communities have to step up. Our particular hospice is about 60% is from the community and 40% from the government. And it's a service we offer free. It's a shift in thinking too, and really in a sense it almost minimalizes what I'm doing as a palliative care nurse. Oh, yours isn't good enough. We need to do the assisted suicide. And I think most people just don't even realize what palliative care is and what we can help them through or what we can do for them.
So the Supreme Court, and this is very important to note, is that when the Supreme Court made their decision to strike down our assisted suicide ban in our criminal code, they did it on the basis of a fallacy, on a false dilemma fallacy. So what they did, very beginning of their decision, is they open with a paragraph that says that if you're suffering at the end of your life, then you have one of only two choices. You can either continue to suffer and die a horrific horrible suffering death, or you can kill yourself. And they said the solution to those two choices is to allow physicians to kill you instead. That's their solution. And we've always maintained that there's actually another option. We don't just have the choice of suicide or horrific death. There's actually a third option, which is palliative care. And to that I say, someone who actually cares for someone who is suffering, who loves them, when they hear that request that they want assisted suicide, that they want to die, their response to that request is not, okay, let's get the ball rolling, let's see if we can get the proper forms signed in order to make this happen. Instead, the response of someone who deeply cares and deeply loves an individual who is suffering is to explore that a little bit more, explore the request, and see what is it that we can do to alleviate that suffering.
It is a cry for help, just like we talk about someone who tries to commit suicide. That is a cry for help. Like, I just can't handle it on my own anymore. That's a call for me to call in the troops and say, we need to help. We're obviously failing to provide the care that you need. We really haven't delved to the bottom of what's going on here.
First of all, I would want to know a little bit about that request. So I would want to know, have you just been thinking about it? Has it been a thought that's run through your mind, or is this actually a wish that you want to end your life, or if you actually made a plan to end your life and how you would do it? And then I'd explore why. Is this because you're afraid that you're going to die in a lot of pain, or drowning in secretions, or really short of breath?
Usually I answer, I'm here for you. I'm going to help you through whatever conditions or symptoms you have. We're going to help you manage it. The doctors are ready to be here on hand for you. So, we're with you. You don't need to be alone or scared of what's going to happen. And I think that a lot of the time, just knowing that they have that support for even the unknown, that there's something ready for them, helps. A lot of people who have fears of a long, lingering illness, that pain will be an issue, I think I would say to them, so much of that can be controlled. You would be amazed at the treatments that are available. So don't think that you have to suffer through all of that. That's why we're there. We are experts. We've learned a lot about palliative care and different medical treatments. So we're there to support them 24/7 in that. And sometimes when those treatments help and you are not burdened by that part of the illness, then you can really enjoy life. I've seen people who pain is an issue, and they're exhausted, and we help control the pain, and suddenly they have some more energy. They can do things, they can enjoy life, they can converse with their family very meaningfully, and they're very grateful for the last days that they have.
Even before euthanasia and assisted suicide were made legal in Canada, people would ask for it. We asked Gail what usually drove those people to make such a request.
I think especially it's because people are afraid. There's a lot of anxiety, there's fear of suffering. So we really reassure them that we are with them every step of the way, that they will be given all the support that we can offer, medically speaking, but also emotionally speaking, that we can support also to the family. As far as the fear of suffering, we can relieve that then, like certain symptoms that do happen at the end of life that are very difficult to manage within a home setting, we are able to do in the hospice setting then with medications and just the knowledge that we have, right? So we provide that support round the clock, and that includes then that holistic support.
We did a public opinion poll in which we asked Canadians, how would you like to die? Most Canadians, if you ask them, would say, I would like to die at home, surrounded by my loved ones, pain-free. Yet 70% die in acute care hospital bed. There are lots of reasons for that, some of them policy, some of them structural. But our focus was, first of all, to create an environment in which Canadians' aspiration for a natural death, which we defined as death of natural causes, in an intimate environment, surrounded by your natural caregivers. If that's the objective, then there are a host of policy questions that come. Who are our natural caregivers? Well, family is the first thing that comes to mind, but there are many people in our society who don't have families to care for them. Really, when we come to a terminal diagnosis, it's no longer about medicine and curative care. It is about palliative care, the alleviation of pain, but there's much more that's going on. There are spiritual questions, there are emotional questions, there are relationship questions. They all need to be invested in appropriately. And as a society, by giving this piece to the medical system, we have major consequences.
Palliative care, in just a few words, is living well until you die. But a lot of people have a misperception about palliative care, both individuals and care professionals, in that it's just for people at the end of life, in the last weeks or last months. And actually, palliative care is much more than that. The WHO definition of palliative care says it's an approach to improve the quality of living for patients and families that are experiencing a life-threatening illness. And also, it works through prevention and relief of suffering through impeccable assessment of symptoms and treatment of pain and other problems, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. So the definition is talking about improving the quality of living. It's not even talking about dying. Palliative care, by definition, does not intend to extend or shorten a person's life. And so, by definition, there's no place for medical assistance in dying or physician-hastened death in palliative care. And I think there is a stigma of palliative care. The stigma is that if I'm referred to palliative care, that's it for me, and there's no hope, and they're giving up on me. And palliative care is not like that.
When we think of palliative care, we usually think of that period immediately prior to death, when a terminal diagnosis is there. We suggest that we ought to think about death in the same way as we think about birth. It's a major process in the cycle of life. When someone is born, society invests all sorts of mechanisms. We have prenatal classes. We spend a lot of time in terms of making sure that care is provided in all of its dimensions for newborns. We need to provide a similar investment in thinking about death. Up until the last century, that was a fairly common thing. Death was expected, but we've turned death into this medical thing where it happens with tubes and in sort of as part of the medical system.
Essentially, I've been receiving palliative care my entire life. So palliative care is medical care that isn't meant to cure or solve a problem, but to make life livable, dealing with an issue, a medical problem. So there is no cure for my disease. For me, there really isn't much hope for a cure that might ever work. But palliative care is what I receive day to day. So medical care to help me deal with some of the deficits that I have, maintaining strength as long as I can. This wheelchair really is an example of palliative care. It doesn't solve the problem, it doesn't make me work, but it allows me to live happily with that problem in place, with that deficit in place. So when I have doctor support, respirologists, neuromuscular specialists, my wheelchair, all these people are just working to make my life as productive and fulfilling as it can be within the limitations that I have.
I can give a good anonymous example. In the community, we have a gentleman who has been struggling with ALS for a number of years now. And with the doctor's advice, his wife has reached out to the funeral home, to our bereavement counselor, and she's been seeing her regularly to help deal with the difficult emotions about that, because what happens in a situation like that is there are many deaths along the way in the relationship. Maybe your physical relationship, maybe how you're able to communicate with each other. Each of these things has its own sense of grieving, inadequacy, frustration that it's very difficult to navigate on your own. And having someone who has a sensitivity to that, speaking into your life, encouraging you, creates some great opportunities even for those people together to experience that together and not just feel the tension around it, but really come to understand each other and still show each other in different ways how they love each other.
I was 6 years old when we were told that my dad was diagnosed with ALS. I didn't really get it at first, so my dad was sick, that was just okay, just keep going on with life. Eventually, he started using a cane to walk, and then eventually he moved to a walker and a scooter, and intentionally for us that was fun because we could boot around on the scooter and the wheelchair, so it just kind of became part of our life.
When he was first diagnosed, then people said, oh, you must be devastated. I wasn't so much devastated, it was like, okay, now what are we going to do? And that was always, Jason's mentality was, he always said it's man's natural desire is to live. Ending his life was never an option or never a consideration. He says, even as difficult as the disease was, he wanted to be here with his family, so that's why he did all the, took all the options that he could, in order to be here with his family as long as possible. So considering he had his disease for 6 years, he lived at home and functioned at home until the last month.
Relationship stayed the same. He still took the role of a father to us kids. I think the biggest thing that really hit us was when he lost his voice, and then the communication there wasn't as strong, so the relationship wasn't as strong, but the fact that he was still there and you could come talk to him every day, he would listen. He wasn't able to respond quite as fast, but we still sat there. He'd type it out in his box, which we were very thankful for that we could listen to. But otherwise, it was still the same. And the father part.
It's a very difficult journey. So for the person to go through, it's definitely changing. There's a lot of equipment and opportunities and people willing to help. We had good care all the way through the doctors. They're accommodating as far as the equipment. Technology is quite something nowadays. The things that are available compared to years ago, as far as communication, as far as eating. It's a very difficult journey, there's no doubt about it, but it is life-changing that you have a whole new appreciation, even as a caregiver or as children, that you have, it's about showing compassion. It's about putting your own needs, aside and helping a person live their life in spite of a terrible disease.
Their focus should definitely be on much greater palliative care. Their focus shouldn't be on how to first end a life, but instead kind of go around that and think about how I can work on helping them or creating a comfortable lifestyle for them. Without palliative care, I'm not sure how that would go. I couldn't even begin to imagine. We were given a lot, so to think without palliative care, he would have just kind of sat in a chair and slowly, we would have been a burden.
when I think about something like end-of-life care, it's not just that person's suffering and pain, but my response to your suffering and your response to my suffering forms me. It's not just about you experiencing pain and having it alleviated in some way, but what's happening to me inside? How is my character being formed and developed in the midst of caring for someone who is in need? The way that we treat them doesn't just reflect who we are, but forms and shapes who we are. And looking at us as not just blobs of material, but body-soul combinations in some holistic way, speaks to this, and it speaks to palliative care, it speaks to end of life. I think it's something that needs to be recognized.
We had one lady that had chronic obstructive lung disease and already had shortness of breath, and was thinking, well, if I have this now, what's it going to be like when I die? I don't want to have a horrible death. I don't want my kids to see me have a horrible death. But we could reassure her, that we have the tools to treat your pain, your shortness of breath. 95% of the time we can do that, and for the other 5% where we wouldn't be able to fully treat it, we have available palliative sedation. That's usually only the last hours or days. And she was reassured, and her request to have medical assistance in dying went away, and she did die peacefully in hospice. I want to know if they feel like they're a burden on their family. And so we had a lady in hospice that when we asked why she wanted to end her life, that's exactly what she said. She felt like she was a burden on her children. And the children, when they found this out, they reassured their mother that no, this wasn't the case, and that they really valued her and all that she'd done for them when they were younger. And she was reassured. The request went away, and she died peacefully, actually, several days later.
In hospice care, you consider the whole person. It's really important what they're going through emotionally, mentally, providing pastoral care when they need it, doing some memory work, whether it's creating albums or making songs with family or singing together or providing those memories. It's so crucial to them. We have a kitchen and areas to go to. Everyone has their own room. I take care of all the meds that I give them, any treatments, support them in any way, encourage them to do active things, to be involved in living to the end. Anybody who comes to us from hospital are so grateful just to be in this wonderful home-like setting, to have time with their family in whatever capacity. Sometimes they'll have big family meals in the kitchen all together, and we can take them out and bring them to that. Whereas in hospital, it's so busy. They don't have time for those things, and you're all stuck around a little hospital bedroom.
I have heard that sometimes it is very difficult to access their family doctor if the patient's status changes, if suddenly there's maybe increased nausea or increased pain, it's the weekend, they can't get a hold of their family doctor. They can't get a hold of additional nursing support, and those can be very difficult times for the family members in the community. Whereas in the hospice setting, then we have access, direct access to a physician so that we can have orders changed right away. So there's no delay, there's no waiting, and of course that reduces the anxiety for both the patient and the family members.
Day and night different. Yeah, it's beautiful here. I'm not worried. They get you up when you ring for the bell. Then they get you up, get you ready, get you washed, help you go to the bathroom, make you ready for breakfast, bring you a cup of tea already before breakfast. And then breakfast is at 8:30. They pick you up again if you don't come on your own. Then I often say, thank you so much, you're being so good to me. He said, no thanks. We love doing it. We love you. So it's very pleasant.
I remember listening to Dr. Balfour Mount, who is the father of palliative care in Canada. He was speaking at our conference in Montreal, and he said, I guess the dying with dignity people were saying, now we can finally help people die with dignity. And he said, what have we been doing for the last 40 years? We've been helping people die with dignity. We've been also helping them live with dignity, and it's just so poignant, and it's so true. This is what we've been doing. We've been giving people medical assistance as they're dying. We haven't been killing them, but this is what they seem to think is now dying with dignity. No matter what that person looks like or what that person is going through, they are still in God's image. Whether they are someone who is struggling with dementia, whether they're someone who's in the prime of their life and facing cancer, or whether that is a little one who's born with a genetic illness that is just not compatible with life. They are still made in God's image and they still have value. And so I treat everyone with that value. It's not what they have to offer, it's the fact that they were made in God's image, so they have value that can't be taken away, even though they're damaged by the sinful world.
It's a beautiful thing to be born with a disability in Canada in the 21st century, because we do have a country with lots and lots of things available for people with disabilities in terms of medical care, in terms of technological support, software, hardware. I mean, I have a fantastic wheelchair that I can use to get out of the house and do my job. I have computer software that lets me type out my lesson plans and take notes for my students. Every deficit that I've encountered can be solved with the care of people around me and the support of technology and the medical community. So the future is pretty bright.
When it comes to dying, we don't die alone. We die as a father. We die as a husband. We die as a neighbor. We die as a fellow church member. And what makes for a good death? That's something we've lost the ability. I think even many Christians have lost the ability to talk about what makes a good death. Death is not something to be avoided at all costs. We know the fact that we are all going to die, and we need to prepare and live our life in preparation for that death. And there are such a thing as good deaths, and there are many testimonies. Many people know what a good death looks like and it involves relationships. It's not about one person. It's about the patient and the caregiver together being at the center and create an ecosystem of support around that. And government is probably the least equipped institution to really provide care.
Palliative care is, it's all about compassion. This generation's not willing to take care of their parents. They're not willing to take care of their disabled, their handicapped, their terminal disease, because, it's very taxing on everyone. So it's not a matter of just saying, we need palliative care. Everybody has to be able to step up and do it. And if you can show compassion to one another, you will have a good society.
It would help if there was good palliative care available across the board, right? So that we could, with confidence, to say there's great support out there for you. Maybe you're not aware of it, and even maybe cite some examples for them of other people we know that have really lived well even during their illness, with good support, and that they didn't have to despair looking forward, and that one step at a time, that there could be good days still, and that they would, with that support, learn to live that out.
This is an opportunity and a challenge for the church. This is an opportunity and challenge for employers. This is an opportunity and challenge for neighbors. In the same way as we have a neighborhood watch program for kids, ought we not to perhaps have neighborhood care programs for those who are dying, in which we provide support and help?
I think we have avoided death for too long. We somehow have taken on the same romanticized idea that Hollywood has given us, that life is forever, that life is wonderful, that the best bits in life are all the beautiful Hollywood moments. And it's not. That is not what God has given us here on earth. And I think we have this beautiful opportunity to delve into that together, and learn part of this wisdom that we should have around death and dying, and recognizing that it is our entrance into glory. We have a beautiful opportunity then to take away those taboos around death and dying, and recognize that as Christians we have a peace going into it, and we need to grasp hold of that spiritually, but also practically, like that this is something we can do it together as a community. We can support each other through it.
Our practice of love would include taking jobs as nurses and doctors, if we can in good conscience continue, and doing palliative care. Our families should be a model of love. When one of our loved ones is in ER and we surround the bedside and sing some psalms and hymns, it should be a witness to the community that there's a different approach to matters of life and death, and that the sanctity of life ethic is robust and warm, and it really is an ethic of love. Let me give you an example. One of my colleagues had an uncle recently who went into cardiac arrest and went into ER. While there, his condition did not improve, and he was comatose, and his heart rate was being monitored, his breathing was being monitored, and the family gathered, and his heart rate was at about 110 beats per minute. The family knew that he loved psalms and singing, so they did so around the bedside in the middle of the emergency room, and every time they sang, the heart rate level went from 110 down to 80, invariably, just to show that he was comforted. And this is the kind of thing that Christians want to do in palliative care. We don't believe that it's love to put someone to death, but it is loving to increase their comfort, decrease their discomfort, and just love them and be there.
I actually think this is a tremendous opportunity for the church as a social institution. The church as a witness is not just there vis-a-vis her own members. The church exists with a prophetic calling in the midst of society as a whole. And what is striking to me that in a society that is illiterate about death and doesn't even have the vocabulary and doesn't even want to deal with this, we are emerging with a huge opportunity in which many of our neighbors who have no knowledge of the gospel whatsoever are going to have very real care needs. They're going to be alone. Imagine if a church would view its entire neighborhood. Let's be modest and let's say a 20-block radius around the church. And we're going to say we're going to make the effort to get to know every house in that 20-block neighborhood, the names and address, the names of everyone, and find out who it is that there's a lot of people that are dying within 20 blocks of your church. Let's find out who they are. Let's knock on their door and let's offer the Meals on Wheels that we provide to our own church members at a time of sickness. Let's offer them to the people in the 20-block neighborhood. Let's, even if they're not in a situation in terms of to invite them to church, we don't even need to start with that. Let's just knock on their door, find out about their needs, make that daily phone call to that senior who has no one calling for them. There's a lot of social isolation out there. Let's just love them. My guess is we're going to have lots of opportunity to share the gospel.
We're commanded to care for those who are suffering, and this is one of the hardest times in many people's lives, and to stand with them and that they're not alone. That's a huge thing. I find a lot of people feel they're alone, and when they come in and they're loved and cared for, I think we're carrying out God's commands in that way. You know, it doesn't matter. I don't have to judge them for who they are. I just need to care and love them and support them.
Throughout, his whole disease, the church was very good. The amazing thing was, it wasn't just our church. It was like we got cards, we got money, we got from so far away that it was, the community of the saints was quite something. That, the cards, and if there was a need, and, people, like when we needed a van, it was there. If we needed to fly somewhere, it was there. So that was quite overwhelming as far as the church. And as meals, as far as taking care of the kids, there's no problem there. So and then upholding you in prayer, right? So then they say they do that, or they say we're praying for you even if you can't. Those are big.
The lack of care for the marginalized, the poor, the underprivileged was a mark of pagan society for centuries. We really live in a Christianized society, and so many of these good things have grown and developed out of a Christendom of sorts. If anything is central in the Christian community, it's the words of Jesus. And the Lord Jesus is the one who is known throughout the world as the compassionate teacher who laid down his life so that others would live. And in his ministry, he once said, and I'm thinking here of Matthew 11, I just have my Bible here, where Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." When I look around society, when I look inside myself, rest for our souls, what more do we want? We want peace, and there's such a lack of it in this world. And Jesus invites people to him, and he is particularly looking out for the marginalized, the downtrodden, the poor, those without any means to care for themselves. And the Christian community adopted that as its ethic to such a degree that the Apostle John would write, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." And love in the Christian community is not just a feeling that I feel and tell you I feel it, but it is put into words and it is put into actions. And the legalization of doctor-assisted suicide in Canada may lead to an increase in the level of care that religious facilities provide as an alternative, so that people can go where they will be served by those who believe that love is of God.
As a Christian, we look to the example of the Lord Jesus Christ and the compassion that he showed for people when he was on earth, healing and relief of suffering. And so I think that's what I, as a physician, am called to do, is to relieve suffering and to help people to know what their illness is and what the prognosis is and what to expect and what sort of treatments can be helpful. The founder of palliative care, Dr. Cicely Saunders, and the hospice movement in Great Britain, I think she has a great quote, and that is that you matter because you're you, and you matter to the moment at the end of your life, and we'll do everything that we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but to improve the quality of your life until you die.
This is a time for advocacy for the disabled and ill. I think we as a Christian community especially have an opportunity and maybe a responsibility to reach out to those in our community who are suffering because of disability. I mean, for those who are on their own and whose bodies are breaking down and don't feel that they have anybody on their side, it's not that surprising that they might feel their lives are worth ending, and that's too tough to be wrong. But I think it's easy to see from the examples of many people with disabilities who are supported by loving communities, that if the supports are in place, then there's no reason a disability will lead to an unhappy life. So we have an opportunity here, and if we step up, we can really make a difference.
I think we need more hospices in Canada. The hospice is a beautiful balance between hospital setting and home setting. So we will receive residents, we call them residents, not patients, and we receive them sometimes from the hospital and sometimes from the home. And when we receive them from the home, it's because they are either not able to take care of themselves anymore and they live alone, or their family members, their caregivers are burning out. I tend to say to the families, you know what, now you can take off that caregiver hat. Now you can be a family member, you can be the wife, you can be the sibling, you can be the daughter.
A hospital setting is not really conducive to holistic care. Hospitals are really for emergency care, for surgery, for trauma, not for a part of life, and dying is a part of life. The focus of hospitals is to make people better. Traditionally, that's kind of what's happened there, and dying doesn't really fit in with that fast-paced activity. So that can be really challenging for the person that's dying. It's very busy, it's very noisy and loud, lots of lights. It's not conducive to legacy work or time spent with family, just processing what's happening in their life.
I mentioned earlier 70% of people die in an acute care hospital bed. The net cost to the taxpayer of that is approximately $1,100 a day. We can provide the best of home care for $300 to $400. Take a look at the baby boomers coming in, and one can make policy arguments, fiscal arguments as to why this makes sense. I interviewed 30 leading Canadians, including hospital CEOs, board members, policy experts, in terms of what the challenges are. And there are a host of embedded self-interest that really don't want this. It's interesting even how we pay doctors, the fee for service. It's a fascinating little anecdote. In the smoking cessation campaign of the 70s and the 80s, we had the Cancer Society out there in the malls with their educational displays. We had the advertisements on cigarette boxes. The single factor that was the most determinative of the change in policy was a change to the OHIP fee schedule in Ontario, which doctors were provided $10 additional on a physical with someone who was a smoker in order to discuss the health consequences of smoking. That, more than any one factor, is identified in the research, in the academic research, as the cause. Well, what would happen if we said to doctors, as part of physicals for anyone over the age of 50, we're going to discuss advanced care planning. We're going to discuss, have you prepared for death? Not just in terms of the medical sort of do not resuscitate and those sorts of questions, which most people haven't dealt with either and need to be dealt with. but also in terms of what's the care plan. Begin people thinking about the fact of who is going to take care of me. Have those conversations been had? So thinking of this in a much more proactive sort of way.
The Supreme Court of Canada engaged in this false dilemma of two and only two choices when you're facing suffering. The Parliament of Canada did the same. They said you either die by suicide or you die this horrific suffering death. Our academic leaders in universities across the country say the same thing. Many in the media say the same thing. Many advocacy groups are saying the same thing. And we as principled Christians, as principled Canadians, need to offer that alternative. We need to correct the narrative that says that those are not the only two options. We in fact have a good, positive, life-affirming third option, which is palliative medicine. And we can do so much better for our vulnerable neighbors, for those suffering through a disability, suffering through an illness, a terminal illness like cancer or ALS, or suffering from just old age. And I think the loving thing to do then is to advance this narrative of palliative care.
The alternative option of palliative care is not just a theoretical policy. It's a realistic solution that benefits many across Canada. Mrs. Blocker continues to use palliative care and lives a happy and full life at the age of 91. Jason and his family enjoyed the benefits of palliative care until his passing in October of 2010 after a 6-year battle with ALS. Peter Harsevort also enjoyed the benefits of palliative care throughout his life and advocated for disability rights until his passing on January 26th of this year. This project is made in his memory and with profound thankfulness for what God did through him to advocate for the equal protection of vulnerable people. We would hope that all Canadians would be able to enjoy the same level of care and that policies would be implemented to make this happen.